and welcome to the Compassion Fatigue Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Blau. You're listening to Session 16. My guest today is Lanie Smith. Lanie is a registered art therapist, the owner of Integrative Art Therapy, as well as the co-founder of Matters of the Heart Retreat for Couples. She has worked with a variety of clinical populations in numerous settings over the past 8+ years, and her work began with the National Institute of Health researching the efficacy of art therapy with trauma, which resulted in 2 scholarly publications to support her field. Lanie has a true passion for combining art and nature to help individuals, groups, and couples connect deeply to themselves, their partners, and their natural creativity, and she has developed environmental art therapy programming for sustainable practice at numerous inpatient, outpatient, residential, and community sites throughout the greater Phoenix area. Lanie currently specializes in supporting other helping professionals in both behavioral and allied health to cultivate creative and compassionate self-care as burnout prevention, including the healing power of relationships to self, nature, and others. Lanie provides individual and group eco-art therapy, as well as couples retreats, workshops, training, and supervision to support the ethical use of art therapy in order to address unresolved personal traumas that prevent wholeness and healing within the practitioner. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lanie Smith. Hi, Lanie. Welcome to the Compassion Fatigue Podcast. How are you?
Hi, Jennifer. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining me. I think this is going to be just a really interesting and fun topic. And I'm looking forward to you shedding light on this topic for our listeners. So let's start off with, what exactly is art therapy?
Well, art therapy is a mental health field, so it's basically a master's level profession in the mental arena, just like you would think of counseling and social work and marriage and family therapy. It's an alternative to that really brings in the lens of the artist, because all art therapists have to have that training and background in the visual arts, and it really invites clients into an alternative way of communicating using self-expression and exploration and discovery through the creative process and the art making and the resulting artwork. And a lot of counselors will use art. So one distinction I like to make when explaining art therapy is that we do have a training in the prescriptive use of art materials. So the interventions are very much, they're very specific when we are using the art materials.
So I think a lot of people, when they think of counseling, they have kind of a misunderstanding based on what the media portrays, and that's usually someone lying on a couch with a counselor sitting there beside them saying as they pour out their heart, right?
Yes.
So this is really more creative and interactive, right?
Absolutely. Very interactive, hands-on, experiential, sensory. And the therapist can be witnessing the client making art or making art with the client. So it can go both ways, but it's definitely a collaboration. There's no, I can't imagine an art therapist just sitting with a client on the couch and no interaction.
And so I was reading your website a little bit, and I noticed that you have something called eco art therapy. Is there a difference between standard art therapy and eco art therapy?
Well, yes and no. It's a branch of art therapy. So similar to, those of you who are familiar with a very common cognitive behavior therapy, it's almost like a mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy where it's a branch of it and falls underneath the umbrella of art therapy. And so eco art is kind of, it blends eco psychology or applied eco psychology, a lot of times referred to as ecotherapy, where it's very much about, nature and natural materials, natural environments, the themes, seasons, and cycles of nature. And so it's combining all of that with the creative process and the art therapy process.
Cool. That sounds right up my alley. So what types of issues would art therapy be helpful with?
Well, I think I was trying to think of something that it wouldn't, be helpful for. It really is. It's very similar to any other, counseling and behavioral health field where part of the art therapy, the coolest thing I think about my job is that every session looks totally different and it's a little art form in and of itself. And so we are very flexible and adaptable and creative to meet that client wherever they are. And so basically, I've worked with children, I've worked with teens, I've worked with adults, substance abuse, co-occurring disorders, eating disorders, anxiety, depression, trauma, insomnia, chronic pain, traumatic brain injury. I mean, I've really worked a full gamut. And so really the art materials are very helpful regardless of what the issue is. As long as that art therapist is trained in that area, then it can be helpful.
Okay. And so how can art therapy specifically help with the issues of compassion fatigue and burnout?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because, I mentioned all of the things that I've kind of used art therapy to address. And now I'm currently, I work mostly with other clinicians and helping professionals to kind of care for themselves and cultivate the tools to prevent burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. So the thing about, compassion fatigue being that it's very similar to trauma, it's basically burnout and secondary traumatic stress combined. So since the caregivers still do really desire to help, despite the compassion fatigue, art therapy can really help individuals learn to regulate their stress and their emotions. And so with that regulation, then they're able to still be helpful, in the work that they're doing. A lot of the work that I do with clients is about developing resiliency skills. So anyone who's kind of familiar with the trauma arena, there's work, Vanderkolk and Judith Herman and Babette Rothschild, and a lot of the work on trauma. And now Eric Gentry, who does a lot of work around compassion fatigue, he has the 5 key resiliency skills. And so that's a big part of what I'm doing with clients is using the artwork and the creative process to help them cultivate those skills.
Animal welfare workers are often bombarded with secondary or vicarious trauma. So it sounds like art therapy would be pretty effective for processing that trauma. Could you kind of expand on how that process works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially the eco art therapy, because when you're talking about animal welfare work, now I'm getting tongue twisted, animal welfare workers, they already have this very empathic place of connecting with the animals and seeing themselves likely as a part of that natural world. And so eco art can be really especially helpful because it allows them to express that connection while also processing any of the shock or the grief or, the overwhelming experiences and things that they witness by those who maybe aren't as connected and don't recognize their connection to the natural world and, ultimately end up abusing animals or some kind of cruelty. So it really, it can be helpful for helping those care workers get back in touch, with what's important to them and process that and also identify their own intentions and values about why they do the work they do. Because that's one of the important resiliency skills is, intentionality and having kind of that value statement and sticking to your core so that when you do show up and you're doing difficult tasks and working with difficult cases, you have that, kind of centered, grounded place in you that reminds you of why you're there.
Yeah, so I think there's probably some listeners who are saying to themselves right now, I don't have a creative bone in my body. Now, do you need to be an artist or creative to reap the benefits of art therapy?
Not at all. I give this disclaimer very often that you do not have to be creative. You do not have to be an artist, or you don't have to consider yourself creative because, I tend to think that we all have this creative place in us. Some have had it cultivated more than others. Some have more talent than others, but you absolutely do not. And you just really have to be open to exploring this creative process and using materials to communicate in a different way, which ultimately will get you out of your comfort zone if you don't consider yourself creative. And that's, a lot of times where the magic can happen, when we're putting ourselves in new places, doing new things, and finding other parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. So I think, as a musician myself, one of the ways I've been able to express myself as far as traumas and stress and whatnot is through the music that I either write or that I play. But I can
Mm.
also see people that, maybe that they don't consider themselves creative. And just the very act of stepping out of that comfort zone can be therapeutic in and of itself, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think for a lot of people who don't consider themselves creative and are not artists, but still seek out art therapy, a lot of times maybe they've tried traditional talk therapy and that hasn't been successful for them, or they are craving, there's kind of an impulse in them, a natural impulse to be creative, and it's this unexplored aspect of themselves that they're kind of ready to look at. So in that way, I think art therapy can be really a fantastic option for people who've tried other therapies, and yet it can still be really great for those who are new to therapy.
Yeah, and so, whether it's traditional talk therapy or art therapy, I don't think that anything can substitute for professional counseling. But what are some creative activities that maybe listeners can do at home without a therapist that would also be beneficial?
I love the way you phrased that question. That was great because I feel like there are infinite possibilities that people can do at home to kind of spark their creativity, explore that, cultivate it, and at the same time, it's not necessarily considered art therapy unless you actually have an art therapist. So if you're the type of person that you already have that creative streak in you, then you've probably done some things and could dive in, just right where you are with vision boards or collage, drawing or painting. So, what I would encourage, if you kind of already consider yourself creative, is to incorporate more natural things and materials to kind of go outside and let your environment inspire you. And you can just start with your senses, kind of what do you hear, what do you smell, see, taste in the air, touch, if you're picking up objects, plants, rocks, leaves, sticks. And you can just begin to practice asking to interact with your natural world. And that might feel really strange at first because I don't think that's something that as humans we do often. We kind of see the world and its resources as something to fulfill our needs. But by practicing that, it really is this kind of reciprocal respect for all the things that it provides for us. So, for example, when I first started doing this, asking to interact, I remember being a little taken aback because I heard some birds singing and I really wanted to record them just on my phone and capture the sound. But when I asked, what I heard within was that, these birds were kind of scared and wanted me to keep my distance, that they didn't want me to come so close. And so that was really new for me to start kind of listening to my body and tuning in. And it has that just cultivating that sensitivity over time has made me more conscious of the way I live and kind of care for my world. So I would definitely invite you to kind of ask for permission in doing these activities. And then if you do feel safe and kind of like you have the okay to proceed, then you can start to kind of collect natural objects and maybe create a self-portrait or a nature collage. You could even create something impermanent and to kind of leave that as a gift for someone else passing by. And one of the things that I like to do, like if it's a client who's rather new to being outside and connecting with nature, is I'll actually ask them to find a natural object to represent themselves or their current state. And this is kind of a beginning step into the eco art process, starting to kind of see yourself in nature and then seeing nature in you.
I love that. It almost sounds like a spiritual experience in a way.
It is. It is
Yeah.
very much because you're slowing down and you're starting to, feel your connection to the things around you. And so it takes us out of that kind of place that we've been programmed to live in, the problem solving, linear, analytical, logical brain, and has us tuning in with our body and kind of this innate wisdom that we do have.
Yeah. And so you mentioned something, you mentioned a couple activities, and I've heard of this. I have not done this myself. Can you explain what a vision board is?
Yes. So a vision board can be done a lot of different ways. One of the most traditional ways that I've seen like coaches and counselors and therapists do it is to have clients find images in magazines to represent the life that they want. So this is a really good activity usually at the beginning of the year when people are setting goals and resolutions. So you hear of people doing that a lot at, kind of January, end of December. But you can do that at any point in your life. If you're feeling a little stuck and you're wanting to kind of get back to feeling intentional, because we were talking about that as being one of the resiliency skills, you can think about what you really want to live and how you want your life to look and start finding images to represent that.
Okay. So it's almost like a collage, but a little bit more deliberate.
Yeah, because sometimes people will just, select images that they're drawn to. And that is one way of doing a vision board, a very intuitive way of doing one. Whereas a vision board that's kind of more of a traditional goal setting one would be very specific about certain areas of your life. For example, sometimes I'll have people create a mandala, which is just Sanskrit word for circle, and divide that circle into several quarters, kind of like slicing a pie. And each quarter represents a facet of their life. And so they might draw symbols to represent those specific areas that they want to work on. And so that's not necessarily a collage, but in effect, it's still a type of vision board. It's just done through drawing.
Okay. And so, again, not to be a substitute for any type of professional therapy, but what is your opinion on? So, there's kind of a craze right now going on. Well, I mean, and not that it's anything new, but adult coloring books. What is your opinion on adult coloring books as a way to kind of, relax and reduce stress?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's great that adults are seeking creative practices as a means to relax. I think that's a really great sign in our culture. I also think that we are way more creative than we think we are, or we realize, or often realize. And those same adults could easily draw something that they just don't realize that they could draw it yet. And I have clients do this who are kind of afraid of the art process. For example, groups can include individuals who are more or less comfortable on that spectrum of creative tasks. And so I'll just have them close their eyes and kind of take their drawing utensil for a walk or a run or a dance on the page. And it reduces pressure because their eyes are closed. There's no expectation that they create anything beautiful. And when they open their eyes, they can start to add color and shapes and patterns and just fill in something that they actually created, which can be a little empowering, to kind of create something out of nothing. And so I do appreciate coloring books for the fact that it does help people who maybe are terrified of the creative process dive in a safe way because the design is already provided and they just have to choose the color. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily want clients to stay there if I could help them at all cultivate their creative outlets and kind of trust themselves that they have more creativity in them than they realize.
So it sounds like the idea is really not to, create some masterpiece, but it's just to kind of get those creative juices flowing a little bit.
Absolutely, because that really helps with flexibility and stress regulation, and getting those creative juices flowing actually changes the brain state. Brain scans show that different parts of the brain are activated. And so getting that kind of blood flow and, like you said, creative juices flowing, that's going to help you in other areas of life too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, not to get too, technical here, but when we talk about brain changes, I think it's really important to know that when you're dealing with things that are often found in compassion fatigue, such as depression or grief or trauma, those are the type of neural changes that we can often see through art therapy or other creative endeavors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting out of the normal routine and creating that neuroplasticity in the brain so that you're not so rigid and stuck in the anxiety and depression. You might have those passing states, but they're just, impermanent, temporary states. You don't have to stay stuck there.
Absolutely. So, if people out there want to maybe take that next step and work with an art therapist, how can they go about finding one?
Well, one way is to, you can go to the American Art Therapy Association. I believe that's AATA, AATA.org. And on that site, there's a list of all the states. So you could easily go to your state if you're in the U.S. If you're outside the U.S., there are other like international organizations. But for example, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, so we have an Arizona Art Therapy Association. So it's azata.org. So those are a few of the sites that would be a very good place to start.
Okay, great. And so for our listeners who maybe be in the Phoenix area and would like to work with you or just learn more about you, where can they go to find that out?
So my website is integrativearttherapy.net, and all my services are there. I'm actually in the process of building a new one because I do offer online services. So we have, I have a group practice, so it's me and a couple of other people right now. And so we'll be able to offer the online service as well as like consultation and supervision can also be done online. So even if you're outside the Phoenix area, I'd still be interested in connecting.
Fantastic. Lanie, thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and I will put both of those links up on our show notes page at the Compassion Fatigue podcast. So if you are out and about and you'd like to learn more about Lanie or art therapy in general, head on over to the compassionfatiguepodcast.com, and there'll be those show links there. Thank you so much, Lanie. I really appreciate it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Compassion Fatigue podcast. Please head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show so you never miss a single episode. And of course, don't forget to check out the compassionfatiguepodcast.com for more great resources, including a link that you can click on to join our private Facebook group where you can connect with other listeners as well as gain additional support. Please note that this podcast is not meant to provide medical advice or substitute for psychological care. Please consult with a mental health professional if you need additional support. And if you are feeling suicidal, please go to your nearest emergency room or call 911.